Snow blanketed the quiet town of Glacier Hollow, turning the forest into a world of white and silence. A lone figure, an officer in a dark navy uniform, made his way along the icy ridge, his breath rising in pale clouds. He was following a lead on illegal logging, but the radio had gone silent hours ago. As he reached the cliff's edge, headlights flashed behind him. Two men stepped from the shadows, faces hidden, voices cold. Within seconds, the officer was surrounded, beaten, and shoved backward into the abyss. The wind tore away his scream as his body vanished into the snow below. But destiny wasn't finished with him yet, because what the men didn't know was that somewhere in the valley below, a little girl and her loyal German shepherd were about to change everything. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Your support truly means the world to us. Thank you. From the bottom of the winter in Glacier Hollow, Oregon had a way of swallowing sound. The snow didn't simply fall here, it ruled. It buried cabins up to their windowsills, muted the noise of chainsaws and tires, and transformed the evergreen forests into a cathedral of silence. The air itself felt older, thinner, as if time slowed beneath the weight of the frost. On this particular morning, a pale sun hovered like a dim lantern above the ridge, casting long, icy shadows over the valley. Officer Michael Hayes moved through that silence with practiced caution. He was in his mid-30s, tall and solidly built, the kind of man shaped by years of both physical discipline and moral burden. His uniform, dark navy with the Oregon State Police insignia, was dusted with frost. The furrow between his brows rarely left him. It was carved by sleepless nights and the heavy memory of cases that never reached justice. His sharp blue eyes scanned the tree line, watchful and calculating. He was known among his peers for being meticulous, perhaps too much so. But that trait had made him one of the few investigators brave enough to question the operations of Evergreen Timber Co., a company that looked like any other lumber business until you followed the shipments to the wrong places. Michael's breath rose in short, misty clouds as he climbed the icy ridge. His radio had gone silent 2 hours earlier, its last transmission a burst of static. He adjusted his navy cap, the police emblem catching a dull glint of light. Below, the valley spread out in layers of white and gray, and beyond that, the sawmill, a cluster of metal sheds, its smokestacks dormant for the weekend. But Michael knew better. That mill was no longer about lumber. Somewhere under those roofs were crates that didn't belong there. He had grown up not far from here, in a small town where his father taught him that honesty wasn't just a virtue, it was a kind of armor. But after his father's death in a factory accident that had been conveniently blamed on worker error, Michael learned that armor could be pierced easily by power and money. That's what had brought him here. The determination to expose the men who treated human life and nature alike as resources to be exploited. The ridge narrowed as he moved forward. Snow creaked under his boots, the sound crisp and lonely. A flock of crows scattered above the pines, their black shapes slicing through the fog. He paused, resting a gloved hand against a pine trunk. Something in the air felt off, a hum, faint but metallic. Not the wind, machinery. He reached for his binoculars, focusing on the tree line below, and then he saw it. A pair of headlights glinting through the mist where no road should be. Michael's jaw tightened. He crouched, lowering himself behind a fallen log. His fingers brushed the grip of his sidearm. His instincts, honed from a decade of field work, told him to back away, report in, wait for backup. But the radio was dead, and Glacier Hollow was 2 hours from the nearest dispatch. He took a slow breath and began to descend. At the base of the ridge, the world narrowed, the fog thickened, and the trees stood close together like silent witnesses. The scent of pine resin mixed with something harsher, diesel, oil, smoke. He crept closer, boots silent in the powdery snow, and then he saw them. Two men standing beside a black pickup truck, their breath steaming in the cold. The first man, Rex Briggs, was in his early 40s. He wore a long black leather coat lined with wolf fur, the kind of garment that screamed arrogance rather than warmth. His hair, dark with streaks of gray, was slicked back in a way that made his angular face seem even sharper. His eyes, gray and cold as the landscape, watched everything with the detachment of someone used to command. Rex carried himself like a businessman who had long since traded conscience for control. Once, he had been the local golden boy, son of Mayor Walter Briggs, heir to the family lumber empire, but money and easy influence had soured him. Years ago, a dispute with an environmental task force had nearly shut his mill down. Since then, Rex had built his fortune through quiet violence and false contracts, running what locals whispered was an off-book shipping route across the northern border. Beside him stood Mick Tanner, younger, early 30s, but with a frame of brute strength and eyes dulled by too many fights. His thick brown jacket was torn at the elbow, his hands calloused and scarred. Mick had once worked the saw lines at Evergreen, but after a bar brawl left a man hospitalized, Rex had found him, recognized the kind of loyalty that came cheap and dangerous. Now Mick moved like a guard dog, obedient, restless, and always eager for violence. Michael recognized both names from his files. He stayed low, watching as Rex tossed a cigarette into the snow. The ember hissed, a small sound swallowed by the cold. "You sure he'll come alone?" Mick asked, his voice rough. Rex exhaled smoke and smirked. "He already has." Before Michael could react, a sharp crunch of snow behind him made his blood run cold. He spun, but it was too late. A third figure emerged from the fog, swinging the butt of a rifle. The blow caught Michael across the back of the head, sending his world tilting into white blur. He fell to his knees, the snow beneath him turning red where it met his temple. When he blinked through the haze, he saw Rex crouched before him, calm as a man in a boardroom. "Officer Hayes," Rex said smoothly. "You've been very busy asking questions that don't concern you. You've seen the files, haven't you? The Cedar Line manifests." Michael's jaw tightened. He said nothing. Rex sighed, almost theatrically. "You could have just walked away, you know. But men like you never do. You think silence makes you righteous?" Michael's lips parted, a whisper of defiance escaping. "Someone has to be." Rex smiled, a small, chilling curve of amusement. "And someone has to make examples." He nodded once. Mick stepped forward and drove his fist into Michael's stomach. The pain came like fire, then snow, then nothing at all. Rex leaned closer, his voice dropping. "You'll disappear like the rest of them. The mountain keeps its secrets." Mick's boot struck his chest once, twice. The third shove came hard, cruelly deliberate. The edge vanished beneath Michael's boots, and gravity claimed him. The fall wasn't a scream. It was a silence broken by wind. His mind fractured between flashes of white and black, the rush of air roaring in his ears. He hit the slope once, then again, bouncing between rocks until the world blurred into pain. Snow exploded around him like glass dust. When he came to rest, everything was still. The stars above the clouds flickered faintly through the storm. His vision swam, his breath shallow. Somewhere above, engines started. He heard voices fading, Rex's low and sure. "Let the snow bury him." Michael's fingers twitched weakly. His badge, half buried in the drift beside him, glimmered faintly. He tried to move, but the cold was already crawling in, numbing his hands, freezing the pain into stillness. The wind pressed against his face, and with it came a whisper. Soft, familiar, impossible. "Don't give up, Michael. The light's still there." He didn't know if it was memory or mercy. He only knew that for one moment, the world didn't seem as cold. His eyes drifted closed. The storm swallowed everything. Far above, the ridge was empty once more. The wind carried snow across the footprints until there were none left. Down in the valley, the storm eased. From beyond the frozen meadow came the faint sound of a bark, distant, steady, echoing through the night. It was not the sound of danger, but of destiny drawing near, and somewhere, beneath that endless white, a heartbeat still refused to stop. The storm that had swallowed the ridge still lingered over Glacier Hollow, though morning light now pressed through the gray clouds like the hesitant hand of mercy. Snow blanketed the valley below, untouched and glittering. The faint chime of a church bell echoed somewhere distant, muffled by the cold air. It was a quiet that could deceive a person into believing the world was at peace, until you knew what waited beneath it. At the edge of the valley stood the small wooden clinic of Dr. Claire Bennett, a woman whose presence seemed to hold the same calm strength as the pines outside her window. Claire was in her mid-30s, tall and slender, with auburn hair that refused to stay tied, and eyes the color of honey in sunlight. Her face carried both gentleness and exhaustion, the kind that came from too many nights spent between the living and the dying. 2 years ago, she had lost her husband, Tom Bennett, a firefighter, whose bravery had cost him his life in the collapse of a burning tunnel. The town called it a tragedy. Claire called it a scar that never healed, but taught her how to keep breathing. Since Tom's death, she had run the clinic alone, serving the loggers, their families, and the drifters who passed through Glacier Hollow, with frost on their boots and silence in their eyes. Her patients said she had the hands of a saint, but the gaze of someone who had seen too much. Beneath her quiet demeanor was a woman stitched together by loss, faith, and an unyielding compassion that she often mistook for duty. The sound of laughter broke the stillness, light and high, like a bird's call. Ellie Bennett, her 10-year-old daughter, burst into the room, cheeks flushed red from the cold. She had inherited her mother's hair, but not her solemnity. Ellie's spirit was bright and curious, her world still uncracked by grief. She wore her favorite wool coat, a bright cherry red, torn and patched at the sleeves, but always clean, and clutched a sketchbook to her chest. "Mom," she said, breathless, "can I take Valor to the creek, just for a bit? The snow's perfect today." Beside her sat Valor, the German shepherd who had once been Tom's rescue partner. The dog was 5 years old, strong and noble, his coat a mixture of black and tan that gleamed even under dim light. One ear bore a faint scar from an old rescue mission, Tom's last. Valor was not just a pet. He was a relic of memory, a silent guardian who slept by Ellie's bed each night and followed her every step as though guarding the last piece of Tom's soul still walking the earth. His amber eyes were sharp, but his movements deliberate and calm, a soldier retired, yet forever on duty. Claire knelt beside him, running a hand along his thick fur. "You'll keep her close, won't you, boy?" Valor wagged his tail once in quiet promise. She hesitated, glancing out the frosted window. The sky was the color of pewter, ominous, but not yet dangerous. "All right," she said finally. "Just the trail along Crystal Creek. Don't cross the bridge, understood?" Ellie grinned, hugged her mother's waist, and dashed out the door, Valor padding behind her. The world outside smelled of pine and clean frost. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they made their way down the narrow trail. The air was so crisp it seemed to ring with every sound, the creek's frozen surface cracking faintly beneath the morning sun, the distant caw of crows, the whisper of branches bowing under snow. Ellie walked with the eager rhythm of a child set free, stopping every few steps to sketch the way light caught the icicles, or how the trees bent like cathedral arches. Valor trotted a few paces ahead, his nose low to the ground, steam rising from his breath. Every now and then, he'd pause and glance back as if counting her footsteps. To Ellie, he wasn't just a dog, he was her father's shadow, the friend who filled the spaces silence left behind. She sat on a snow-covered log near the creek, flipping open her sketchbook. Her pencil danced quickly across the page, tracing the ridge and the skeletal trees above it. But halfway through a stroke, Valor stiffened. His ears pricked forward, tail raised. A low growl rumbled from his chest. "What is it, boy?" Ellie whispered. Valor didn't answer, of course, but the next instant, he bolted. "Valor!" she cried, scrambling to her feet. Her boots slipped on the icy bank as she chased him through the trees. Branches snapped against her coat, snow flew into her face. She followed the deep paw prints through the drifts until the forest opened into a hollow, a slope leading down to a tangle of broken pines. That's where she saw him. A man lay half buried in the snow, his dark navy uniform barely visible beneath frost and blood. His body was twisted at an unnatural angle, his breath shallow but present. Valor stood beside him, whining softly, nudging the man's shoulder with his nose. Ellie's heart pounded. She dropped to her knees beside the stranger. His face was pale, lips blue, a thin trail of blood frozen at his temple. He looked like he had fallen from the sky, and the earth hadn't quite decided whether to keep him. "Hey, mister, can you hear me?" Her voice trembled, the words small in the vast white silence. She reached out with her mittened hand and brushed the snow from his badge. He's beneath the frost. The letters glinted faintly. Oregon State Police. Realization struck. This was a police officer. Someone important. Someone in trouble. Her hands shook as she pulled her phone from her pocket and pressed speed dial. "Mom, there's a man. He's hurt bad. Please, please come." The line crackled, Then her mother's steady voice cut through. "Stay where you are, sweetheart. Don't move him. I'm on my way." Ellie hung up, tears freezing on her cheeks. She turned to Valor. "Stay with him, okay? Keep him warm." Valor circled once, then lay, down beside the man, pressing his thick body against him. His tail curled protectively, and his eyes stayed fixed on the trees as though daring the forest to threaten his charge. Back at the clinic, Claire was already pulling on her parka and boots, the heavy fur-lined hood framing her determined face. She grabbed her emergency kit, a battered metal case that had saved more than a few lives, and bolted for her truck. The old pickup roared reluctantly to life, tires crunching over frozen ruts as she sped toward Crystal Creek. The drive felt endless. The wind howled against the windshield, carrying flurries that clawed at visibility. When she finally spotted Ellie's small red figure waving from the clearing, her heart nearly gave out from relief. And then it stopped again when she saw the man. He was deathly pale, his pulse faint beneath her gloved fingers. She knelt beside him, brushing the snow from his collar. And that's when she saw it. The Oregon State Police badge, the faint scar running from his jawline toward his ear, a scar she remembered, though she couldn't place where. "Help me roll him," she told Ellie softly. They shifted his body enough to slip the thermal blanket beneath. "He's hypothermic and concussed. We need an evac." She reached for her radio, voice sharp. "Rescue team, this is Dr. Bennett at mile marker 12 near Crystal Creek. I have a male, mid-30s, police uniform, severe trauma and exposure, requesting immediate helicopter evac." Static hissed. Then a voice crackled through, confirming. "Copy that, doctor. ETA 10 minutes. Claire exhaled, her breath visible in the cold. "Hold on," she whispered to the unconscious man. "You're not dying here." When the helicopter thundered above the trees, snow exploded outward in swirling gusts. Paramedics descended, moving quickly under her instructions. They strapped the officer onto the stretcher, securing his IV lines as Claire steadied the head brace. Ellie clung to Valor, who barked once, low, anxious. "Is he going to be okay, Mom?" Ellie asked, eyes wide. Claire brushed her daughter's hair aside and smiled, though her voice trembled. "He will be, because we found him in time." As the helicopter lifted off, its blades scattering light and snow, Claire stood motionless, watching until it became nothing more than a dot against the gray sky. A strange feeling settled over her, not relief, but something deeper, recognition. The sense that this man had not just fallen by accident, but by fate. Valor pressed his head against her hand, eyes following the fading aircraft. Claire looked down at him and whispered, "You knew, didn't you? You always do." The snow began to fall again, heavier now, veiling the valley in white. Claire turned toward home, Ellie's small hand in hers, Valor padding beside them. Yet, even as they walked, she couldn't shake the quiet certainty building in her chest. "I don't know why," she murmured, almost to herself, "but I have a feeling he hasn't really left us. Not yet." And above them, unseen through the clouds, the wind carried the distant echo of rotor blades, then silence. When consciousness returned to Michael Hayes, it came like the flicker of a dying bulb, light, dark, then light again. His body felt heavy, as though the mountain had followed him down and chosen to rest upon his chest. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and pine resin, the kind that never quite left old hospitals in Oregon. Through the frosted window, he could see snow still falling over Glacier Hollow Regional Hospital, soft and relentless, as if winter itself was trying to erase the past few days. A soft hum filled the room, the sound of machines marking his fragile rhythm of survival. He tried to sit up, but pain roared down his spine like electricity. His head throbbed, and the world spun briefly before settling back into focus. The last memory he could grasp was falling, ice, wind, and a voice. A woman's voice, calm and distant. "Don't give up, Michael." Then, nothing. He blinked, and a figure moved into view. Dr. Claire Bennett stood beside his bed, auburn hair tucked messily behind one ear, exhaustion shadowing her warm hazel eyes. Her hands, steady and practiced, checked his IV line. When she saw his eyes open, her expression softened into relief. "You're awake," she said quietly. "That's good news." He studied her face for a moment, something familiar tugging at his memory. "Where?" Am I? His voice came out rough, the words scraping through a dry throat. Glacier Hollow Regional Hospital, she replied. You've been unconscious for 3 days. You suffered a concussion, fractured ribs, and severe hypothermia. You're lucky. Most don't survive a fall like that. He frowned slightly, gaze drifting to the window. Fall. The words stirred images, Rex's cold smile, a boot striking his chest, the void rushing to meet him. He inhaled sharply, pain spiking behind his eyes. Claire touched his arm gently. Don't push it. Your memory will come back, piece by piece. He turned to her, searching her face again. You were there? Claire nodded. My daughter and our dog found you by Crystal Creek. If it weren't for them, you'd still be buried under snow. Your daughter, he murmured. And the dog? Valor, she said, a faint smile curving her lips. He used to be my husband's rescue partner. He never lost the instinct to save people. Her tone faltered slightly when she mentioned her husband, and Michael caught the shadow in her eyes. He wanted to ask more, but the weight of sleep pressed hard again. Claire adjusted his blanket. Rest. We'll talk later. When she left, Michael's mind wandered. Flashes returned. The ridge, headlights, 2 figures in the mist. One name echoed through the fog of memory. Dalton. And another. Cedarline. He repeated them softly, like a prayer. Outside his room, Glacier Hollow was stirring. The hospital's corridors were narrow, lit by flickering bulbs that hummed softly. The nurses moved like quiet ghosts. Between doors. Among them was Nurse Linda Hart, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a sturdy build. She had worked at the hospital for 20 years, long enough to know when something, or someone, didn't belong. She often said Glacier Hollow had 2 kinds of people, those who stayed because they loved it, and those who stayed because they had nowhere else to go. Linda paused at Michael's chart. He's the one from the ridge, right? She asked Claire when they crossed paths near the nurse's station. Claire nodded, still piecing things together. Keep saying the same 2 words, Dalton and Cedarline. Do those mean anything to you? Linda frowned. Cedarline sounds like one of the old lumber routes. They shut it down after that fire 3 years ago. The Briggs family owned the land back then. Claire's brow furrowed. The Briggs family? As in Rex Briggs? The same, Linda said, lowering her voice. And his father, Mayor Walter Briggs. People don't talk about it much, but half this town's money runs through them. Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. She'd treated Rex's men before. Broken fingers, bruised ribs, injuries no one explained. The kind that spoke of violence, not accidents. Later that afternoon, Michael awoke to the sound of soft conversation. Through the haze, he saw Sheriff Samuel Price standing near his bed. Samuel was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, his once dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. His uniform fit neatly, but his badge seemed to weigh heavier than it should. There was a familiarity between him and Michael, though Michael couldn't recall why. Samuel smiled, the kind of smile that belonged to someone used to playing both sides of a conversation. Look who's back from the dead, the sheriff said with a low chuckle. You had the whole town talking, Mike. Michael blinked slowly. You know me? Samuel's smile wavered for a heartbeat. Of course. We worked cases together back in Salem. Environmental crimes, remember? A faint flicker of recognition passed through Michael's mind. Files, maps, late nights at a small office with the sheriff. But something about Samuel's tone didn't sit right. It was warm, almost too warm, as if each word was being measured. You were investigating Evergreen Timber, Samuel continued, lowering his voice. Word is, you found something worth killing for. Michael's throat tightened. Dalton? Cedarline? Samuel froze. Then his face smoothed into an easy grin. Still scrambled, huh? Don't worry about that now. Focus on recovery. He patted Michael's shoulder, but the touch lingered too long. When he left, Claire stepped into the doorway, her eyes following him until he disappeared around the corner. You know him? She asked quietly. Used to, Michael replied. Can't tell if that's good or bad. That evening, the sky outside turned the color of steel. The snow thickened again, pressing against the hospital windows. Claire sat beside Michael, checking his vitals, but there was a softness in her eyes now that hadn't been there before. Over the days, she had come to recognize the kind of silence that clung to him, the silence of someone who had seen good men fall and refused to let it happen again. "You've been through something terrible," she said softly, "but there's still something steady in you, like you're not done fighting." Michael's lips curved faintly. "Fighting's the only thing that ever kept me alive." Before Claire could respond, a sound broke the quiet. Valor's sharp bark from outside the door. It was a low, warning sound that sent adrenaline rushing through her. She opened the door and stepped into the dim corridor. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Down the hall, a shadow moved, too fast to see clearly. The air felt colder suddenly, like a draft through an open window. Claire's voice rose slightly. "Hello? Who's there?" No answer. She glanced down and saw something beneath the doorframe, a folded piece of paper, edges damp from melting snow. Her pulse quickened as she bent to pick it up. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, the ink smeared. He was meant to die on the mountain. Stop looking. Her breath caught. She stepped back into the room, closing the door behind her. Valor had already positioned himself in front of the bed, muscles tense, ears alert, eyes locked on the door. His growl was low and steady. Michael, now fully awake, saw the note in her trembling hand. "What is it?" Claire hesitated, then passed it to him. "Someone doesn't want you alive." He read it twice, jaw tightening. "Then they're going to be disappointed." The wind outside howled, rattling the windows. Valor lowered himself to the floor, lying across the threshold like a sentinel, carved from loyalty and instinct. His amber eyes glowed faintly in the dark, fixed on the hallway beyond. The storm continued, and within its whispering rage, danger moved unseen. By the third day after the warning note, the storm had thinned into flurries that drifted across the pines like lost feathers. The town of Glacier Hollow lay hushed beneath a new coat of snow, the roads buried so deep that even the wind seemed tired of its own voice. Inside the Bennett farmhouse, the fireplace crackled softly, though the warmth could not reach the cold knot tightening in Michael Hayes's chest. He sat at the wooden table, staring at the map he'd found sewn inside his torn uniform, a yellowed forest survey marked with red ink. The word Cedar Line was written over a cluster of circles that led toward the foothills north of town. Across from him, Dr. Claire Bennett poured steaming coffee into 2 chipped mugs. Her auburn hair was loose, curling gently over her shoulders, and though her hands were steady, her eyes betrayed unease. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly. "If that tunnel really exists, it's not just evidence you'll find down there. It's the men who buried it." Michael folded the map, slipping it into his jacket. "I can't walk away now. The storm covered their tracks, but this place..." He tapped the table. "This is where the roots begin. Guns, drugs, lumber shipments, all tied to Briggs's company. If we can get photos, the Bureau will have enough to open a federal case." From the living room, Ellie Bennett looked up from her sketchbook. "You're going out again?" she asked, her voice soft but edged with worry. Her red wool coat hung on a peg by the door, the torn sleeve recently mended by her mother's careful stitching. Claire smiled faintly. "Just for a bit, sweetheart. We'll be back before dark." Beside Ellie lay Valor, stretched out on the rug, his black and tan coat gleaming in the firelight. The German shepherd lifted his head, amber eyes alert. He was restless, as if sensing that peace had once again slipped beyond the walls of the farmhouse. Michael crouched beside him, running a gloved hand down his neck. "You ready for another mission, partner?" Valor's ears perked, and he gave a single, low bark in reply. The drive to the Evergreen Timber Mill took them along narrow forest roads lined with snow-buried pines. The air outside was brittle, every breath sharp as glass. Claire drove while Michael scanned the map under the weak morning light. Ellie sat between them, her small hands buried in Valor's fur. She tried to be brave, but every time the wind howled through the trees, she squeezed her mother's arm tighter. When the rusted sign for Evergreen Timber Co. finally appeared through the mist, they fell silent. The mill loomed at the edge of a frozen clearing, its corrugated metal walls scarred by age and fire. The windows were blackened, and the wooden loading docks sagged under years of neglect. It looked like a place forgotten by law and mercy alike. They parked the truck behind an old lumber shed. Michael stepped out first, his boots crunching through the snow. He motioned for quiet. The air was still, but the silence felt wrong, too deliberate. Claire followed, pulling her coat tighter. the color of her scarf vivid against the pallid landscape. Ellie held Valor's leash, the dog sniffing the wind, muscles taut with instinct. "Stay close," Michael whispered. He pushed the main door open with the barrel of his flashlight. Inside, dust drifted in lazy spirals. Broken crates littered the floor, and graffiti covered the far wall. Faded warnings, the kind left by people who saw too much and lived just long enough to regret it. Near the back, a section of flooring had been replaced recently with new boards. Michael knelt, pried one loose with a crowbar from the tool rack. Beneath it, a hollow echoed. He swept his flashlight across and found a narrow tunnel descending into the ground, framed by crude wooden beams. "Help me move these," he said. Claire hesitated, glancing at Ellie. "I'll stay up here with Valor," Ellie said, before her mother could speak. Her tone carried quiet determination. "If anyone comes, he'll warn you." Michael nodded. "Good thinking. Don't wander, no matter what." He and Claire climbed down the narrow steps, their boots sinking into damp earth. The air grew colder, thicker. A faint hum of machinery pulsed somewhere deeper underground. When they reached the bottom, the tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber lined with stacks of wooden crates. Each crate was stamped with the Evergreen logo, but when Michael pried one open, the truth spilled out. Inside the hollowed logs were rows of rifles wrapped in plastic, each etched with serial numbers filed off. Another crate held sealed bricks of white powder. Claire's breath caught. "My God!" Michael raised his camera and began taking photos. "This is it. The whole operation. Briggs wasn't just cutting trees. He's been running a trafficking ring through the lumber shipments." But before he could finish, Valor's bark echoed from above, deep, sharp, and urgent. Michael froze. "Someone's here." An engine roared outside, its growl bouncing off the tin walls. Then another, closer. Claire's pulse quickened. "We have to get out." The sound of boots stomping overhead cut her off. Men's voices shouted orders. One was rough, unmistakably familiar. Mick Tanner. "Check the warehouse. Dalton wants it clean. Nothing left standing." "Dalton," Michael whispered, realization flashing. The name that had haunted his dreams now had a voice. They climbed out of the tunnel just as the first truck headlights cut through the snow. Michael grabbed Claire's arm, pulling her behind a stack of crates. Valor stood between them and the door, growling low, his body coiled to spring. Two men entered, carrying gas cans. Their faces were half hidden beneath scarves, but their movements were purposeful. "Torch it and go," one said. "No one's supposed to be here." Michael raised his gun. The sound of the safety click broke the stillness. "Put it down," he ordered. The nearest man spun, startled, his weapon half raised. A single gunshot cracked through the warehouse, deafening in the confined space. Michael fired once, hitting the man's arm. The other ducked behind a crate and returned fire. Wood splintered, dust raining down from the rafters. "Claire, stay down!" he shouted, exchanging shots. Valor lunged forward, tackling the gunman as his weapon misfired. The man fell, pinned under the weight of 100 pounds of fury and loyalty. Suddenly, the back of the warehouse erupted. One of the fuel cans had ignited. Flames licked across the floor, climbing the walls in hungry orange streaks. Heat surged through the air. Claire tried to crawl toward the exit, but a collapsing beam struck her shoulder, knocking her down. "Michael!" she gasped. He turned, eyes widening. Without hesitation, he sprinted through the smoke, grabbed her beneath the arms, and pulled her clear of the debris, just as the ceiling groaned overhead. Sparks rained around them. Their hands met briefly, gloved, trembling, but real. The contact was fleeting, yet something unspoken passed between them, stronger than the fire's roar. "Go!" he shouted. "Get to the truck!" Outside, the night had turned white again, the storm building anew. They stumbled through the drifts, Valor limping but unrelenting. When they reached the clearing where the truck was parked, Michael's stomach dropped. Ellie was gone. "Ellie?" Claire's voice cracked, raw with panic. She ran toward the trees, calling her daughter's name. The only answer was the wind. Then Valor stopped, nose pressed to the ground. A crimson scarf, Ellie's, lay half buried in the snow, its edge stained dark. Tiny footprints led away from it, vanishing into the northern pines. Claire fell to her knees, clutching the scarf. "No, no." Michael scanned the tree line, gun raised, heart hammering. Somewhere far off, an engine started again, faint, fading north. "They took her," he said hoarsely. "They took your daughter." Valor lifted his head toward the ridge, letting out a long, haunting howl that echoed through the blizzard. His paws scraped at the snow, digging furiously as if uncovering the path himself. Michael placed a hand on the dog's back, voice steady but trembling. "We'll find her, boy. I swear it." The flames behind them devoured the mill, lighting the storm with ghostly orange glow. Smoke rose into the sky, twisting with snow until the world itself seemed to burn and freeze all at once. In that furious silence, Valor's growl deepened into something primal, a promise that neither fire nor ice could bury. And as the wind swallowed their voices, the mountain listened. The blizzard howled like a wounded beast across the ridges of Glacier Hollow, sweeping clouds of snow through the dark timber valleys. The world was nothing but white and wind, an endless sea of frost devouring the night. Yet beneath that merciless storm, three figures pressed onward: Michael Hayes, Dr. Claire Bennett, and the German shepherd Valor, their silhouettes blurred against the mountainside. Every step was a battle against nature and despair. Michael's breath came in short bursts, his shoulder bound tightly under Claire's makeshift bandage. The bullet wound throbbed with each heartbeat, but he forced himself forward. Ahead, Valor's fur was rimmed with ice, his body tense, muzzle low to the snow as he tracked the faint scent left behind. Occasionally he'd glance back, eyes blazing with a determination that pulled them onward even when hope thinned like the air. They had followed the trail for hours, guided only by Valor's instinct and the faint blood drops staining the snow. Ellie's scarf had been a sign, but beyond that, the wilderness had swallowed her whole. Claire stumbled once, catching herself against a pine trunk. Her auburn hair clung damply to her face, eyes burning from wind and tears. "Michael? How much farther?" Michael scanned the darkness. "She's close, I can feel it." He lifted his binoculars. Through the curtain of snow, a shadow appeared. A wooden structure perched against the cliffs of Ridge Peak, its roof sagging beneath years of neglect. A hunting cabin, the same one from his nightmares, the place he'd been thrown from days earlier. Fate, it seemed, had drawn the circle closed. When they reached the cabin, the door hung ajar, light flickering faintly from within. The smell of oil lamps mixed with gunpowder. Michael raised his weapon, signaling Claire to stay behind him. Valor crouched low, muscles coiled. Inside, the dim light revealed three men, armed, tense, and at their center, Rex Briggs, his once polished face now marked with desperation. His thick frame filled the room, his expensive coat clashing with the grime of the hideout. One hand gripped Ellie's arm, the other held a revolver. Rex's gray eyes narrowed when he saw Michael step in from the storm. "You again. Guess the mountain didn't finish the job." Michael's voice was low but steady. "Let the girl go, Rex. This ends tonight." Rex laughed, the sound sharp and hollow. "You think you can stop this? You're just a broken cop who doesn't know when to quit." He tightened his grip on Ellie, who whimpered softly. "I told you, no one touches the Briggs family and lives to tell it. You and your lady doctor should have stayed buried." From the corner of the room emerged Mick Tanner, Rex's enforcer, the same man who had shoved Michael from the cliff. His beard was unkempt, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, and guilt poorly hidden behind cruelty. "You heard the boss," he sneered. "Drop the gun, hero!" But Valor growled, his voice a thunder low and primal. Rex's men turned their weapons toward the sound, and in that instant, chaos erupted. Valor lunged forward, striking the nearest guard's arm, sending his rifle spinning across the floor. Claire dashed to Ellie, tearing her free from Rex's grasp, while Michael opened fire. The cabin filled with the deafening echo of gunshots and splintering wood. Michael's shoulder flared with pain as a bullet grazed him, but he pressed forward, tackling Mick. The two men crashed against the table, sending maps and crates flying. Mick swung a heavy punch, splitting Michael's lip, but Michael countered with a strike to his ribs, the years of training kicking in. "Still fighting for ghosts," Mick hissed. "Better ghosts than the devil," Michael grunted, driving his fist into the man's jaw. Mick collapsed, dazed. Across the room, Claire shielded Ellie beneath the window ledge as bullets shattered the glass above them. Rex reloaded, aiming at Michael's back. "You never learn, Hayes," he roared, finger tightening on the trigger. Before he could fire, Valor slammed into him from the side, jaws clamping around his wrist. Rex screamed, the gun falling from his grasp. The dog held on with every ounce of strength, the firelight gleaming off his fur. With a snarl, Rex kicked him hard in the ribs, sending Valor tumbling. The shepherd whimpered but rose again, defiant, teeth bared. Michael stumbled toward Rex, bleeding but unyielding. "It's over!" Rex sneered, reaching for the fallen pistol. "Not for me." The two men fired almost simultaneously. Michael's shot struck Rex square in the chest, while Rex's bullet tore through Michael's shoulder. The sound hung in the air, followed by silence broken only by the storm outside. Rex staggered back, disbelief frozen on his face before collapsing against the wooden wall. Claire rushed to Michael's side, pressing her hands over the bleeding wound. "You're losing blood." "I've lost worse," he said through gritted teeth, managing a faint smile. Behind them, Valor limped toward Ellie, nuzzling her trembling hands, tail wagging weakly. Then came the distant thump of helicopters and the growing wail of sirens. Lights flickered through the snowstorm. Federal agents finally answering Michael's emergency signal transmitted from his badge earlier that night. The door burst open, and Agent Nora Collins stepped in, weapon drawn. She was in her early 40s, lean and sharp-eyed, her dark hair tied in a no-nonsense braid. "FBI, drop your weapons!" she barked, though the fight was already over. Within minutes, officers flooded the cabin. Among those escorted out in handcuffs was Sheriff Samuel Price, his face pale as ash. "You don't understand," he muttered. "They made me—" Agent Collins cut him off coldly. "Save it for the courthouse." Michael sat against the wall, breathing heavily, watching as Rex's body was carried out under a tarp. "Price was in on it," he said to Claire. "He kept the town blind while Briggs ran his empire." Claire nodded quietly. "Not anymore." When the dawn finally came, it broke like forgiveness across the mountains. The storm had passed. Snow still clung to the trees, but patches of green peeked through where sunlight touched. Weeks later, as winter surrendered to spring, Glacier Hollow began to heal. The mill was seized, the Briggs empire dismantled, and the mayor's corruption exposed in headlines that reached all the way to Portland. At Claire's farmhouse, the porch smelled of coffee and thawing earth. Michael sat wrapped in a flannel blanket, his arm still in a sling, but strength returning to his frame. He'd traded his badge for a quiet kind of peace, helping the town rebuild the trails and clean the creek. Ellie, now free from nightmares, ran through the yard with Valor trotting beside her, a faint scar glinting beneath his fur. The German shepherd carried his head high, tail wagging lazily, as he watched her spin in laughter beneath the spring sunlight. Claire stepped onto the porch, 2 steaming mugs in her hands. Her smile carried warmth and something unspoken, a beginning rather than an ending. "You still owe me a cup of coffee, Officer Hayes," she said, teasing lightly. He grinned, eyes soft. "If I brew it, will you risk drinking it? Only if you promise not to burn it." "Deal." They shared a quiet laugh, one that melted the last remnants of winter between them. Valor stretched under the porch, resting his head on his paws, eyes half closed, but watchful as ever. The golden light of morning spilled across his fur, reflecting in his eyes like twin embers of faith. Above them, the pines swayed gently, no longer whispering of storms, but of renewal. And as the wind carried the scent of spring through the valley, Claire's voice broke the silence. "You know, Michael, not everyone who falls is lost." He looked toward the horizon, where the first wildflowers pierced through the thawing ground. "No," he said softly. "Some fall just to find their way back to the light." Valor's tail gave a slow, contented thump against the porch floor, as though agreeing with the truth of it all. Because sometimes God doesn't send miracles in thunder or flame. He sends them as a child and a dog named Valor. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. They come quietly, in the form of loyalty, courage, and love that never gives up. Michael, Claire, Ellie, and Valor reminded us that even in the darkest storms, faith still finds a way to guide us home. Because when all hope seems lost, God often works through the hearts of ordinary people and the devotion of His most loyal creations. In our own lives, we all face mountains, storms, and nights that feel endless. But like Michael and Valor, we can choose to keep walking, to trust that every fall has a purpose and every wound can lead to light. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles still happen. Leave a comment below to tell us where you're watching from, and type Amen if you believe that God still works through love, loyalty, and second chances. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith, courage, and healing, and may God bless you and everyone you love.